MTG and me, this is Charles. With an Hour of Devastation red-black burn deck, I'm calling Dynavolt Alchemist Plus. So we saw these red-black burn lists bouncing around Standard about 10 to 12 months ago. Most of them were generally considered budget, but I played one for several weeks and the deck felt really good. It was a fun deck to play, there was a lot of interactivity with the opponent, it stole games fairly frequently and often got opponents' health down to a level where they were truly sweating over the decisions they were going to make, and that's just plain fun magic. So Hour of Devastation's brought 3 new cards to consider for the deck, and we're going to include all 3 of them in it. So as the name suggests, Dynavolt Alchemist, we're running both Dynavolt Tower and Thermo-Alchemist in here. As such, I'm just going to cover the artifacts in the deck first. So we're running 4 copies of Dynavolt Tower. So this 3 mana artifact gains 2 energy for each instant or sorcery you cast, and with 24 instants and sorceries in the main deck, it shouldn't be that difficult to build up a steady supply of energy. For creatures, we're going to run 10 creatures total. This is where our critical mass of pingers lies. So we're going to run 4 copies of Firebrand Archer and 2 copies of Thermo-Alchemist in the main board. These 8 pingers are going to give you the critical mass necessary to get lethal damage in against your opponent. And while Firebrand Archer is a little more fragile at 1 toughness than Thermo-Alchemist has been in the past, it'll force the opponent to make difficult decisions about what creatures to remove and when. Next up, we're going to run 2 copies of Wall of Forgotten Pharaohs. This, combined with Dynavolt Tower, should give us enough artifacts in the deck to turn on the secondary mode of Unlicensed Disintegration, enabling us to sneak in 3 additional damage to the target opponent. Now, Wall of Forgotten Pharaohs synergizes well with some of the lands we'll be talking about later, and serves as pingers number 9 and 10. For instance, we're going to run 4 copies of Fiery Temper. Now, this is a 3 mana burn spell that can target a creature, player, or planeswalker for 1 and 2 red, but where it really shines is in conjunction with the various madness enablers that we're running in the deck. Being able to deal 3 damage for 1 red mana in Standard is a pretty good rate of return. Next up is 4 copies of Unlicensed Disintegration. This is our 1 catch-all removal for creatures. This will affect most creatures in Standard. With the 6 artifacts in the deck, the hope is you'll also be able to ping in for 3 damage off this spell, increasing its value significantly. Next up, we're going to run 16 sorceries. Now that's a lot of sorceries, but keep in mind that several of the cards are madness enablers. First off, we're going to run 4 copies of Alms of the Vein. This is a 3 mana, target opponent loses 3 life and you gain 3 life. Now the life gain is probably slightly less important than it was a year ago, given that you're running additional creatures. However, it's in your best interest to keep those creatures alive as long as possible, and that additional life gain gives you a little bit of a buffer to make a better informed decision as to when to block. Alms of the Vein does shine even more when madnessed out for 1 black in conjunction with some of the other spells in the deck. Next up, we're going to run 3 copies of Avacyn's Judgment. Avacyn's Judgment is 1 colorless mana and 1 red, and deals 2 damage divided as you choose among any number of target creatures or players. This allows Avacyn's Judgment to act as an early game removal against various small aggressive creatures, but also as simply a 2 mana burn spell, and when used in conjunction with pingers can really be a force multiplier. So for example, even straight up casting Avacyn's Judgment in the mid game for 2 mana, dealing 2 damage to the opposing player with 2 pingers on the board means you're actually dealing 4 damage for 2. Alright, next up we're going to run 4 copies of Cathartic Reunion. You could also run copies of Tormenting Voice if you're concerned that discarding the 2 cards is too much of a tempo loss. However, I found there are enough madness cards in the deck that Cathartic Reunion really pays off. Next up, we're going to play 4 copies of Collective Brutality. Now, a year ago when these red-black burn lists were running around, this was actually a budget card, available for $2 to $3. It's now seeing a lot more play in other formats and is kind of expensive in the $12 to $13 range. However, it plays very well in this deck, and I'll be playing 4 copies of it. The real strength in Collective Brutality lies in its modal nature. You can choose up to 3 modes, discarding up to 2 cards to escalate it. So if we cast Collective Brutality, discarding Alms of the Vein and Fiery Temper to madness with 2 pingers on the board, we're going to deal 6 damage from the 2 pingers, then we're going to deal 8 damage from the 3 spells, we're going to gain 5 life. So this is 14 damage to the opponent and 5 life gain on your end, and you're stripping out 1 of their instant or sorcery cards as a threat. Once again, excellent value for this card in the deck. Finally, we're just going to run 1 copy of Shreds of Sanity. This allows us to return up to 1 instant and 1 sorcery from our graveyard. In this red, black, burn, madness deck, it really is an advantage, because you're likely going to return a card such as Fiery Temper or Alms of the Vein to your hand, and immediately cast it. And if you have 2 pingers out, once again, you'll be casting 2 spells that turn, dealing 4 damage plus the spell damage itself. Alright, we're going to run 22 lands total. We'll start with the basics. We're running 6 mountain and 6 swamp, pretty straightforward. Next up, the non-basic lands. We're going to run 4 copies of Foreboding Ruins, 2 Smoldering Marsh, and 4 Ramunap Ruins. Foreboding Ruins and Smoldering Marsh are pretty self-explanatory. They're there for mana fixing, particularly in the early game for Foreboding Ruins, Smoldering Marsh in the later game. What's really important from Hour of Devastation, the main addition to the deck, is the Ramunap Ruins. So this is a desert card which taps for colorless. When this desert card is on the battlefield or in your graveyard, Wall of Forgotten Pharaohs becomes more than just a 0/4 defender, and then adds those additional pingers which help you finish out the game. Additionally, once you run out of steam, which is almost inevitable in a red-black burn deck, you're going to be able to spend 2 colorless mana and 2 red, tapping and sacrificing your runes to deal 2 critical damage to those opponents. This can often mean the difference between winning a game and losing a game, even with just 1 Ramunap Ruins on the board. Alright, so let's look at our sideboard. So I think it's important to mention that sideboards can be very meta-dependent. But in my case, I'm running 3 copies of Lightning Axe. This serves as creature removal, but is also an additional madness outlet, enabling us to discard things such as Fiery Temper for value. Next up, I'm running 4 copies of Magma Spray to remove pesky creatures such as Scrap Heap Scrounger or anything with Embalm or Internalize. I'm also running 3 copies of Buy. Then we're going to try 2 copies of Cut to Ribbons. Now I almost think Cut to Ribbons could fit in the main board if we could find a slot for it. Dealing 4 damage to the target creature is alright. It's a pretty good return on cost for 2 mana, but I think what's really valuable in this is where the red-black burn decks kind of fade out is in the mid to late game. And being able to cast Ribbons from your graveyard, pumping in all available mana to deal that last little bit of damage is probably quite good. Finally, I'm running 3 copies of Transgress the Mind. Being able to strip out those high-value threats, such as Torrential Purehulk or any of the upcoming God cards, can be really helpful to the burn strategy. Also, even stripping some of the counter spells could be incredibly useful to the deck. So that's the deck. That's my take on red-black burn, which I'm calling Dynavolt Alchemist. Plus, if you've got any comments on the deck, suggestions for how to improve it, or want to share your experiences with this deck or a similar red-black burn deck, feel free to leave a comment below. Alright, thanks for watching.
If you enjoyed the video, you could help us by clicking that like button and leaving a comment. And to support the channel, please click that subscribe button. Also, don't forget to check us out on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks for watching!